The reinforced doors to the cockpit loomed before them, scorched from earlier impacts, humming faintly with alien power. Behind those walls lay the commander who had stolen their vessel, and the controls that chained it to Mars's destruction. Ethan wiped blood from his temple with the back of his hand. His breathing steady though his body screamed with exhaustion. He could feel every wound he carried, yet none weighed heavier than the memory of Raines's final words. The captain's sacrifice had bought them this chance. To waste it would dishonor him. Samir crouched beside the bulkhead, fingers racing across his datapad as he probed for weaknesses in the door's defenses. His eyes narrowed in concentration, sweat dripping onto the cracked surface of the pad. "Their lock is resilient," he muttered, but it was weakened by the reactor surge. "If I overload the feedback cycle, it will force a manual release." Marcus leaned heavily on the captured blade. His legs stiff from the gash that slowed him but had not stopped him. He stared at the door with the solemn gaze of a man who had read this story before in countless histories. The final stand, the desperate gamble, the moment when ordinary men bore the weight of nations. "Every age has its martyrs," he said softly, "and every victory has its price." Jacob stood closest to Ethan, his young hands tight around the alien rifle. His eyes, once restless and uncertain, now shone with hard-earned resolve. "We've come too far to stop here," he said, his voice trembling but unbroken. "If we fall, then at least Mars lives." Samir's datapad sparked, and with a thunderous groan the cockpit doors slid open. Inside, the air shimmered with unnatural energy. At the center of the chamber stood the alien commander, taller than the rest, its form a ceaseless whirl of stolen faces and flickering shapes. Its voice carried the echo of 1,000 stolen tongues. "You struggle against inevitability. Your resistance is but a whisper against the void." Ethan stepped forward, blade drawn, his voice sharp with defiance. "Then hear this whisper, and know it's the last thing you'll ever hear." The battle exploded in an instant. The commander moved with inhuman speed, limbs splitting into jagged weapons that struck with lethal force. Ethan met it head-on, steel clashing against organic blades, each impact reverberating through his bones. The alien strength was overwhelming, but Ethan fought with precision honed by years of war, every strike fueled by the memory of those who had already fallen. Marcus circled to the side, swinging his blade with grim determination. He was slower, his injury dragging at him, but his strikes carried the weight of conviction. When the commander lashed at Ethan, Marcus intercepted, the blow tearing across his chest. He staggered but did not fall. "I told you," he growled through bloodied lips. "Every tyrant falls." Jacob fired burst after burst from the rifle, the recoil bruising his arms. The energy bolts tore through the commander's shifting form, slowing its regeneration. He shouted above the clash, his voice cracking. "It's working. Keep pressing." Samir, crouched at a console, diverted his focus from combat to strategy. He scanned the controls, his heart sinking as alien code scrolled endlessly across the screens. "The course is locked deeper than I feared," he said, panic in his voice for the first time. "We can't stop the collision with Mars. The only way is to alter the trajectory." Ethan shoved the commander back with a brutal strike, his chest heaving. "What trajectory?" Samir's eyes locked with his. "There's an asteroid belt within reach. If we override the engines manually, we can redirect into it. But we won't survive." The words hung like a blade over them all. Jacob froze, his rifle lowering slightly. Marcus coughed blood, his grip on the blade tightening. Ethan's jaw clenched, the truth settling heavy as iron. Their lives for millions. A trade no soldier could refuse. The commander laughed, a hideous sound of overlapping voices. "You see, even your own logic damns you. You will perish, and your world will burn." Ethan met its gaze, fury burning through fatigue. "No, our world will live because we perish." He struck again, blade driving deep into the commander's chest. The creature shrieked, its body fracturing into shards of writhing energy before disintegrating into nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Samir staggered to the console, his fingers flying. I can reroute thrust, but someone must guide the ship manually. The system won't allow remote override. His eyes met Ethan's, and in them lay the unspoken truth. Whoever stayed would not leave. Marcus slumped against the wall, his face pale, yet his eyes blazed with fire. My students will never hear this lesson from me, but perhaps history will still write it. His voice grew ragged. Let me be among those remembered. Ethan shook his head. No, you've bled enough. You've given enough. His gaze shifted to Jacob, who stared back with horror dawning. You will survive, Ethan said firmly. You'll take the story to Mars. You'll tell them what happened here. That's your duty now. Jacob's voice cracked. I can't leave you. Not after all this. Ethan gripped his shoulder with fierce strength. You can. You must. Heroes don't always die in the fight, Jacob. Sometimes they live to make sure others remember it. Samir pressed the final sequence. The ship shuddered as engines roared, tearing it from its path toward Mars and hurling it instead toward the barren asteroid. The deck lurched violently, alarms blaring in furious unison. Ethan pulled Jacob toward the escape pod bay. Marcus dragged himself beside them, refusing to be left behind without a final word. At the pod, Ethan shoved Jacob inside, sealing the hatch as the young man pounded against the glass. Don't waste what we've done, Ethan shouted. The pod ejected, tumbling into the void, carrying Jacob away from the doomed vessel. Through the small viewport, he saw Ethan turn back toward the cockpit, Marcus leaning heavily on his arm, Samir hunched over the console with grim focus. They were silhouettes against the flickering lights, men who had chosen death so others might live. The asteroid grew larger in the pod's window, and in the final moments before impact, a blinding flash consumed the United Starliner 93. The ship erupted in silence, a star blooming and fading in the endless dark. Jacob covered his face with trembling hands, his body racked with sobs. Yet beneath the grief was a fierce pride that would never leave him. They had fought back. They had turned certain doom into salvation. When his pod was recovered days later, his account spread through every colony and outpost. The names of Ethan Cole, Marcus Vega, Samir Khan, and Captain David Rains became etched into the legacy of mankind, not as soldiers or martyrs alone, but as proof that humanity's spirit burned brightest when faced with the abyss. Mars endured. Earth endured. And long after, when tales of alien empires and cosmic wars filled the skies, men remembered the flight that fought back, and the heroes who chose to fall so that others might rise. The corridors of the United Starliner 93 no longer felt like a vessel of transit. They had become a labyrinth of war. The hum of its engines, once a promise of safe passage, now carried the undercurrent of imminent destruction. Ethan led the men forward, every movement measured, every sense sharpened by the knowledge that time bled away with each breath. Mars loomed ahead, a silent target, and unless they acted swiftly, the ship itself would become humanity's executioner. Samir walked at Ethan's shoulder, datapad clutched tightly, eyes flicking between readouts and the dimly lit walls. His mind danced through circuits and overrides, chasing weaknesses in the alien control. Their systems override ours like a parasite, he whispered. But parasites still depend on the host. If we cut them from the root, they falter. Behind them, Marcus carried the captured blade as though it were an heirloom of forgotten warriors. His clothes were stained, his breathing heavier than before, but his voice remained steady. Every empire falls to the courage of the outnumbered. They've forgotten this truth. We'll remind them. His words carried a weight that lifted Jacob, who followed close, rifle in hand. The boy's knuckles whitened on the weapon, but he did not falter. Fear lived in him still, but alongside it now burned resolve. They approached engineering, the heart of the ship. 2 alien guards patrolled the entrance, their forms shifting in restless fluidity. Ethan raised a hand, signaling silence. He crouched low, gesturing Jacob to take the flank. The young man obeyed, though his pulse thundered in his ears. On Ethan's nod, the group struck. The first alien fell to Samir's trap as a conduit overloaded, spewing arcs of electricity that rippled through its unstable body. It shrieked, the sound 1,000 stolen voices colliding, and collapsed into fragments. The second turned, its limbs elongating into jagged blades. Ethan surged forward, his body moving with the brutal precision of his soldiering years. He drove the stolen blade into its chest, feeling it twist and writhe before it melted into ash. Jacob froze, staring at the fallen thing. For a moment, he thought of how close its strike had come, the blade of its arm nearly grazing his throat. He swallowed hard, forcing his legs to move again. Marcus laid a hand on his shoulder as they pressed onward. Do not dwell on how near death comes. Dwell only on what you still have to give. Inside engineering, the air was hot and acrid, filled with the scent of burned circuits. Consoles flickered with alien symbols, their geometry both intricate and menacing. Samir rushed forward, scanning readouts. His expression darkened. They've locked the navigation core. The ship is fixed on a collision course. Even if I sever controls, their failsafe will override. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then the fight is not only for the ship, but for time itself. Ethan turned to Samir. What if we sabotage propulsion? Force a stall? Samir shook his head. Too risky. We might cripple our own chance of altering course. The only way is the cockpit, but it's fortified. They've anticipated resistance. Before Ethan could respond, the ship shuddered violently, throwing them against bulkheads. The intercom crackled with the alien commander's voice, colder than the void outside. You resist like insects clawing at inevitability. Know this. Your struggle only hastens the end. The words struck a chord in Marcus, who barked a laugh, grim and defiant. Every tyrant has said the same. And still men have stood. Ethan steadied himself, his body aching from the impact. He turned to his comrades, voice low but commanding. We move to the cockpit. Every second lost is millions of lives. The journey forward was merciless. They fought through narrow passages where shadows writhed with alien patrols. The men learned to adapt, Jacob firing bursts of captured energy, Ethan cutting with precision, Marcus pressing forward despite wounds, and Samir manipulating doors and lights to fragment their enemy's cohesion. Yet with every victory came cost. Blood streaked Ethan's arm. Marcus stumbled, a gash across his leg. Jacob's breaths grew ragged, yet his eyes hardened, each fight carving boyhood from his face. In one battle near the communications array, an alien lunged from the ceiling, its limbs barbed and glistening. It slammed Ethan to the floor, its weight suffocating. Jacob reacted without thought, driving his rifle into its side and firing until it disintegrated into smoke. He staggered back, chest heaving, staring at the remains. Ethan rose, clutching his shoulder, and for the first time allowed a brief nod. Good. You're learning. Jacob's throat tightened. The nod meant more than words, more than any accolade he had ever sought. It was recognition, a passage into manhood forged not by years but by fire. As they advanced, Samir's datapad displayed warnings in crimson. The trajectory is locked. In less than an hour, we strike Mars command. He looked up, sweat on his brow. Even if we retake the cockpit, there's no guarantee we can undo what's been set. Marcus leaned against the wall, his voice steady despite the pain. Then we fight knowing we may fail. That has always been the burden of men. They reached the final approach to the cockpit, a reinforced corridor lined with bulkheads. As they prepared to breach, Captain Raines's voice echoed faintly from a nearby channel. His tone was calm though strained. Boys, I've managed to hold 2 of them here in the reactor chamber. I can keep them contained, but not for long. Ethan froze. Captain, get out. We need you with us. There was silence, then the sound of labored breathing. "No. This is where I'm needed. You know it as well as I do. If I overload the chamber, it will cripple their systems long enough for you to reach the cockpit. It will cost me, but it will give you a chance." Marcus's face darkened, but he inclined his head. "He speaks as the ancients did, giving one life to save thousands." Raines's voice grew faint. "Ethan, take care of them. And tell the world, tell them we fought." The channel cut off. Moments later, the deck beneath their feet shook with the force of a controlled detonation. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and the walls themselves seemed to groan. Samir's datapad lit up with confirmation. The reactor surge disrupted their failsafe. "Systems are weakened. This is our only chance." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, honoring the captain's sacrifice. Then he looked to his men, his voice iron. "For him. For Mars. We finish this." The men braced themselves, weapons ready, hearts steady in the storm. Ahead lay the cockpit, the alien commander, and the final struggle for control of the United Starliner 93. The air itself seemed to tighten, as though the ship held its breath, waiting to see who would claim its destiny. The guard's shadow loomed over the lounge, its features flickering like a broken projection. It stood motionless, yet its presence pressed on every man in the room like a weight. No one spoke above a whisper, but in those hushed exchanges, resolve was beginning to form. Ethan's eyes never left the alien, studying its stance, noting the rhythm of its shifting form, the intervals when it seemed distracted. War had taught him that victory was often found in the smallest cracks of an enemy's armor. He leaned close to Marcus, his voice nearly inaudible. "They think fear will hold us still. But fear cuts both ways." Marcus's reply was a steady whisper, heavy with conviction. "History remembers the few who stood when surrender was easier. Perhaps it will remember us." His gaze swept over the younger men, resting briefly on Jacob, who fidgeted with restless energy. Samir sat with his datapad dimmed on his lap, his expression unreadable. In truth, his mind worked like a machine behind still waters. He had already mapped the ship's backup conduits, traced the auxiliary circuits that might bypass the aliens' lockdown. Every system, he reasoned, had a flaw. He only needed time to expose it. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A sudden jolt shook the vessel as the hijackers adjusted course, throwing Jacob against the edge of his seat. He bit back a curse, but the guard flickered in his direction with a ripple of distorted motion. Ethan caught Jacob's wrist before he reacted further. His grip strong, his voice calm. "Patience. There will be a moment, and when it comes, we take it." That moment arrived hours later, when two guards rotated their patrol. For an instant, only one remained in the lounge, its distorted frame scanning the passengers with mechanical indifference. Ethan signaled with a glance. Marcus drew Jacob into a hushed conversation, deliberately raising his tone just enough to hold the alien's attention. Samir leaned forward as if adjusting his datapad, and Ethan moved like a predator closing distance. The struggle was silent but brutal. Ethan's arm locked around the alien's throat, though its flesh twisted and reformed beneath his grip like molten metal. Jacob lunged to help, adrenaline shoving fear aside. The alien screeched, its voice a hideous chorus of stolen tones, before Ethan slammed its head into the bulkhead with all his strength. Samir thrust the datapad into the creature's chest, delivering a focused electromagnetic surge. The figure convulsed, then collapsed in a heap of shifting fragments. Jacob stared at the fallen thing, chest heaving. That worked. His voice was a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. Ethan's expression remained stone. "One guard. Many more remain. Now we know they can bleed." Samir knelt, prying a weapon from the body, a sleek obsidian blade that shimmered unnaturally. He studied its surface with a scientist's eye, murmuring, "Not forged but grown. Organic technology." He tucked it into his belt, his mind already cataloging possibilities. Marcus exhaled, his voice steady even as his heart raced. Men of Earth have faced monsters before. The faces change, the terror remains. But so does defiance. Jacob's hands trembled as he wiped sweat from his brow. He looked from Ethan to Marcus, then to Samir. We can really fight them. Not just wait to die. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Jacob. It's deciding something else matters more. Right now, Mars matters more. The group gathered closer, their circle tight, their voices hushed. Rains had not been seen since the takeover, though Ethan trusted the captain had not surrendered easily. That thought alone steeled his resolve. We strike again soon, Ethan murmured. Not to win outright but to learn. Every skirmish gives us knowledge. Samir nodded. I can bypass the environmental controls. If I reroute power from life support for a short time, I can trigger pressure doors to close between compartments. We could trap them in sections of the ship. Marcus's eyes gleamed. Divide them, weaken them. The same tactics men have used for centuries. Jacob interjected, his eagerness overtaking caution. And when we take them down, we steal their weapons. Turn their own blades against them. Ethan studied each man in turn, weighing not only their words but their resolve. He saw fear, yes, but also determination. A unit was forming, not by training but by necessity. Then it begins. We will not wait for them to dictate the battle. We choose when and where. Their first chance came in the narrow corridors leading to engineering. 2 guards moved ahead, their distorted bodies gliding with unnatural grace. Samir triggered a sequence on his datapad, and with a hiss, pressure doors sealed behind the creatures, trapping them between bulkheads. The sudden alarm startled them, and in that heartbeat of confusion, Ethan led the charge. The fight was savage. Marcus swung the alien blade with surprising strength, his scholar's hands steady as iron. Jacob darted forward, striking with desperate speed, learning as he moved. Samir provided cover, triggering bursts of light and sound from wall panels to disorient their foes. Ethan was the anchor, every motion precise, every strike deliberate, his training carving a path through chaos. When it ended, both guards lay shattered, their forms collapsing into unstable matter that hissed into smoke. Jacob staggered, sweat dripping, his face pale. We did it again. Marcus rested a steadying hand on his shoulder. Victory is never certain. That is what makes it worth fighting for. Samir recovered another weapon, this one resembling a rifle that pulsed with faint light. He turned it over with fascination. If I can decode its energy signature, perhaps we can replicate its effect. Ethan wiped blood. His own or theirs, he couldn't be sure, from his knuckles. Don't get lost in the details. They still control the cockpit. And they said this ship is a weapon. That means time is against us. They returned to the lounge, breathless but alive, every man carrying the weight of what they had done. Fear still lingered, but alongside it pulsed a new current. Hope, fierce and dangerous. They had struck and survived. More importantly, they had proven the hijackers were not untouchable. Jacob looked out the viewport toward the distant glimmer of Mars, his voice soft but resolute. They want to turn us into a weapon against our own people. I won't let that happen. Ethan's gaze followed his, the stars cold and endless beyond. Neither will I. Neither will any of us. The men exchanged a silent oath in that moment, their breaths heavy, their faces lined with exhaustion but lit with determination. Somewhere ahead, more battles awaited, more blood would be shed, but the path was set. They would fight not only for themselves, but for the countless lives depending on them. The alien threat had made one critical mistake. In trying to break the spirit of men, it had forged it instead. And now, within the cold corridors of United Starliner 93, the first embers of defiance had become a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The United Starliner 93 drifted away from Earth's orbit like a silver arrow loosed into the void, her hull glinting in the filtered sunlight. Inside, the vessel carried men bound for Mars. Workers, soldiers, engineers, men who had grown used to traveling between worlds as routinely as their ancestors once boarded trains. The corridors hummed with life, laughter echoing faintly against metal walls. Yet beneath the chatter, an invisible tension ran, the kind that precedes a storm. Captain David Rains sat alone in the observation deck before launch, his gaze fixed on Earth, a world he had crossed 100 times yet never tired of seeing. A man of precision and discipline. His calm exterior was his trademark, though in the privacy of his thoughts he wondered how many more journeys his bones could endure. For decades he had ferried passengers across the system, trusting in human engineering and human will. He did not know that on this voyage, neither would be enough. In the common lounge, Ethan Cole leaned back in his chair, his arms folded across his chest. A former soldier who had traded the battlefield for civilian quiet, he retained the clipped posture of command. He spoke little, listening instead to the hum of voices around him. War had taught him silence was not weakness, but patience. Still, he missed the clarity of orders, the certainty of knowing who was friend and who was foe. Here, in the sterile corridors of a passenger liner, life felt almost too peaceful. Marcus Vega occupied the seat opposite him, a teacher by trade, though his true craft was storytelling. He carried himself with the bearing of a man who lived half in the present, half in the pages of history. His eyes lit up as he spoke of forgotten wars and brave men who had defied the odds. To Marcus, every moment of life echoed with the voices of the past, and he found in them reminders that humanity had endured far worse trials than the universe might yet hurl against it. At a table near the viewport sat Samir Khan, his hands folded neatly around a datapad he rarely set down. A systems engineer, he saw the world in circuits and algorithms, and even in casual conversation his mind wandered back to schematics and equations. He was quiet, not out of shyness but from the constant exercise of solving problems only he seemed to see. Those who knew him well trusted his judgment implicitly. Those who did not often mistook his silence for indifference. The youngest among them, Jacob Miles, darted from one corner of the lounge to another, too restless to remain still. A technician with more enthusiasm than experience. His energy sometimes bordered on reckless. Yet there was a sincerity in his grin, an eagerness to learn from those older than him. He admired Ethan's composure, Marcus's wisdom, Samir's intellect, and above all Captain Rains's command of the unknown. He wanted to prove himself, though he had never yet been tested by anything beyond broken conduits and routine repairs. The journey began uneventfully, the stars unfolding in long arcs through the observation windows. Meals were shared, stories exchanged. Ethan listened quietly as Marcus recited the tale of men who had once defended their homeland against impossible odds. Jacob leaned forward, hanging on every word, imagining himself one day at the center of such a tale. Even Samir, with his practical leanings, admitted that history had its uses, if only to remind men of what could be endured. Captain Rains checked on his passengers often, speaking with the steady assurance of a man who had guided more flights than he could count. He had an instinct for reading men, for knowing when someone required a word of reassurance or when silence was enough. He felt a quiet pride in this collection of travelers, strangers bound by circumstance, yet already shaping into something more. Then, on the third day of flight, the hum of routine fractured. An alarm pierced the corridors, shrill and mechanical. Lights flickered, gravity shifted slightly, and murmurs rose to shouts. Before anyone could comprehend what had gone wrong, the ship's intercom crackled to life. A voice unfamiliar, cold and metallic, resonated through the decks. This vessel is no longer under human control. Remain where you are. Resistance is futile. Doors sealed with a hiss, locking passengers into compartments. Several men pounded against the walls, demanding answers, but the voice only repeated its command. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The cadence of the intruder's speech was unlike any human tongue, distorted yet deliberate. Marcus muttered something about ancient conquerors declaring dominion, while Samir instinctively began mapping the ship's emergency systems in his mind. The first glimpse of their captors silenced the room. Figures entered, tall and sinewy, their forms flickering as if reality itself strained to contain them. Their features shifted constantly, faces morphing from one visage to another, a grotesque imitation of humanity, never settling on one shape. These were no smugglers, no pirates. They were something else entirely. Shapeshifters, intruders not of this world, whose purpose became clear with the cruel efficiency of their commands. One of them seized the intercom again. This vessel will complete its mission. It will strike at Mars Defense Command. Your species will understand helplessness before it understands extinction. A heavy silence filled the lounge. The words landed like a blow, colder than the vacuum outside the hull. Jacob's eyes widened, his earlier energy replaced by fear. Marcus's jaw tightened as if he had already seen this scene before, not in life but in the dusty pages of history. Samir muttered under his breath, half calculation, half prayer. Captain Rains clenched his fists at the idea of his ship turned into a weapon against his own people. It was Ethan who spoke first, his voice low but steady, pitched only for the men near him. If they mean what they say, no one else will stop them. That leaves us. His words were not dramatic, not shouted, but they carried the weight of inevitability. Jacob looked at him, his youthful bravado trembling beneath the enormity of the moment. You mean fight them? There are too many. Marcus answered for him, his tone grim yet resolute. There have always been too many. That never stopped men before. His gaze met Ethan's, an unspoken agreement forming between them. Samir closed his datapad, a rare gesture of finality. If they have locked the systems, they think us powerless. That is their first mistake. Captain Rains studied their faces, measuring resolve against fear. He knew better than most the cost of defiance, but he also knew surrender was no option. Slowly he nodded, the weight of command settling on him even outside the cockpit. Then we will find a way. The intruders moved on, leaving the lounge under guard. In their wake, silence lingered like ash. But within that silence, a seed had been planted. Fear was still thick, but alongside it grew something stronger, an ember of defiance. The men exchanged glances, and though no oath was spoken aloud, something unshakable bound them in that instant. They did not yet know how nor when, but they understood one truth with perfect clarity. This flight would not end as their captors intended.